Hi, my name is Isabel Crabtree-Condor. I'm delighted to be with you here today to explore narrative change practices and crises. I think it's important and helpful to place this conversation about crises, narratives, and narrative practices within a broader framing of power and understanding power and how power operates. For me, narratives are a form of power, a form of often invisible power, and it's not something that I came up with myself. It's been part of feminist approaches to popular education, movement building, and contestation of relationships of power for decades. So it builds on a very strong foundation of analysis and kind of critical thinking around why the world is the way it is and what we might do about it. Narratives are a way that power can recreate itself and recreate the conditions for normalizing the way that things are. So for creating apathy, okayness with the status quo, a sort of naturalization of the way that things are or have been and continue to be. I also thought maybe it's helpful to share some sort of definitional ideas about what narratives are, what things that I've captured along the way, which perhaps are helpful for this conversation. So narratives are often things that we just sort of somehow know, and they're often shared over and over again through varied institutions, which are the guardians of social norms. They are indeed a way that social norms are communicated. So in that vein, dominant narratives communicate what is acceptable, whose voice counts, who is acceptable, what matters, and also what is possible. So they are an essential part of understanding how crises develop and what our responses as societies can be, but also why social change does or doesn't happen and why social justice is so difficult to achieve. But still worth trying. I think the narrative practice gives us new locations for collective action and new approaches. Maybe some of them are actually very old, but just reinvigorated approaches for looking at the power relationships that are at play around the issues and groups that we care about, that we want to communicate differently about. So it can be helpful to think of narratives as being a mosaic of many, many stories, which together help us to make sense of the world. Narratives provide a sort of shortcut for our brains. They can create a sense of insider, outsider, with us, other. Narratives are what is known about a topic, a group of people, whereas stories are sort of more told, expressed. That's a definition or a differentiation that perhaps becomes a little bit more blurred as you actually enter into the practice of narrative change and storytelling work. Another idea is that narratives are like, or can be thought of as, deep ocean currents. So they are powerfully, invisibly operating below the surface, creating waves at that surface. But there's a lot going on below the surface of a particular story, and narrative practice is a way to engage with those depths. Another reason why it's useful to think about narratives and power is because narratives are also powerful because they can activate us, they can connect us, they can divide us, they can make us feel things intensely and deeply, but they can also just make us switch off. Therefore, narrative practice also has to be considerate and aware of that power that we ourselves as narrative change practitioners wield, and really build that awareness of power into our approaches so that we aren't recreating power relationships that already exist, but actually trying to transform them through our collective action around narratives.